Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, January 1944. The air hung heavy with a biting Midwest chill, carrying the faint, unfamiliar scent of pine and something sweet baking in the distant mess hall. Across the vast, echoing barracks, newly arrived Italian prisoners of war, fresh from crowded troop transports and long, rattling rail journeys, often found themselves chuckling. Their laughter, a curious mix of bewilderment and perhaps a deep, aching homesickness, would ripple through the cavernous space. It wasn't at a joke or a guard's clumsy English. It was at the sight of apple torte. Before we delve deeper into this surprising chapter of history, tell me, where in the world are you watching this story unfold from today? They had never encountered anything quite like it. An unfamiliar fruit, baked into a buttery golden crust, so profoundly different from the cucina of their distant homes. This was a paradox. Men held captive, thousands of miles from everything familiar, yet finding amusement in a dessert that would soon become an unexpected comfort, even a quiet symbol in their wartime lives. But why the laughter? What was it about this simple torte that sparked such a reaction from men who had known deprivation? Within this intricate microcosm of Camp McCoy, distinct lives navigated this unique reality. Captain Evelyn Reed, the camp's logistics officer, felt the constant quiet pressure to ensure the camp ran smoothly and humanely. Her well-worn leather-bound ledger, detailing every ration and supply requisition, was a testament to the colossal administrative task she faced daily. She balanced strict War Department directives with the raw, immediate needs of nearly 2,000 men, many of them just boys. Her dilemma was perpetual: how to uphold a protocol of austerity while ensuring adequate provisions for men officially designated as enemies. Then there was Private Vittorio Rossi, an Italian POW from Sicily, whose primary motivation was simply to survive with dignity. He clung to the faint hope of returning to his family, keeping a small, crudely carved wooden Madonna hidden carefully within his barrack cot, a tangible, warm link to his homeland that he touched each night. Vittorio wrestled daily with the tension between adapting to the strange rhythms of American life, learning rudimentary English phrases, and preserving his Italian identity. What did he truly think of this new, sweet, utterly foreign food? And out in the frost-nipped fields surrounding the camp, Mr. Arthur "Art" Jenkins, a local Wisconsin farmer and civilian contractor, supervised groups of these Italian POWs. His stained, calloused work gloves spoke of a life tethered to the land, a life now inextricably linked to this war. Art's motivation was a blend of patriotism and the simple, practical necessity of finding labor during a severe manpower shortage. But his dilemma was more personal. How did he reconcile the wartime propaganda that demonized these men with the reality of their quiet, efficient work ethic and surprisingly amiable demeanor, especially when they shared a meal? The laughter at the torte was just the beginning of a deeper story. The laughter at the torte was just the beginning of a deeper story. Mr. Arthur Jenkins, out in the open field surrounding Camp McCoy, saw that deeper story unfold daily. The cold morning light, sharp and unforgiving, often found him supervising the Italian prisoners, their breath clouding in the January air as they cleared frost-hardened fields or dug drainage ditches. These weren't the caricatures of ruthless enemies painted by wartime posters. They were men who moved with a surprising rhythm, their shovels biting into the frozen earth with a steady, almost meditative sound. The raw scent of turned soil, mingling with the faint smell of wood smoke from the camp, became the backdrop to this quiet, unexpected collaboration. One particularly bitter afternoon, a young private named Alessandro, barely out of his teens, struggled with a stubborn root, his brow furrowed in concentration. Art, without conscious thought, knelt beside him, pointing out the best angle for the shovel with a gloved hand. He didn't speak Italian, Alessandro knew little English, but the shared language of physical labor, the grunt of effort, the cold metal against the soil, was universal. Art noticed Alessandro's hands, though calloused from recent work, were still finer than his own, perhaps an office worker or student before the war. It was a small, almost imperceptible detail, but it chipped away at the ingrained image of the enemy, replacing it with a more complex human mosaic. The War Department, in bulletins often delivered by telegram, had outlined precise protocols for prisoner treatment. But those directives, drafted in distant Washington, D.C., rarely accounted for the nuances of human interaction. Captain Evelyn Reed, for instance, held one of those ledgers, its leather cover softened by constant handling. As Camp McCoy's logistics officer, she faced those nuances daily. Her dilemma was perpetual, upholding austere War Department protocols while ensuring adequate provisions for nearly 2,000 men officially designated as enemies. The biting Wisconsin winter air, often carrying the scent of wood smoke, was a constant reminder of fundamental needs that transcended official paperwork. Then there was Private Vittorio Rossi, a young Italian POW from Sicily. His primary motivation? Simple survival, preserving dignity, clinging to the faint hope of returning home. He kept a small, crudely carved wooden Madonna, hidden carefully within his barrack cot, its smooth, worn surface, a tangible link to a homeland thousands of miles away. Vittorio wrestled daily with adapting to American life, learning rudimentary English, and preserving his Italian identity. How did men like Vittorio, caught between two worlds, truly experience this enforced hospitality? This wasn't merely about individual struggles, it was an intricate logistical dance. Who exactly decided Midwestern farm labor was the ideal solution for idle POW hands? Out in the fields, Mr. Arthur "Art" Jenkins, a local Wisconsin farmer, supervised groups of these Italian POWs. His stained, calloused work gloves spoke of a life tethered to the land, demanding practicality. Art's motivation, patriotism, and the necessity of finding labor during a severe manpower shortage. Yet, his dilemma was personal, reconciling wartime propaganda that demonized these men with their quiet, efficient work ethic. The cold, crisp air often carried the scent of freshly turned soil, a common ground. By late 1943, Camp McCoy alone housed over 2,000 Italian POWs. Reports from military psychologists, often buried in internal memos smelling faintly of stale coffee, suggested a surprising finding. Well-fed, productively employed prisoners were significantly less prone to escape or subversive activities. Their daily rations, a generous 3,000 calories, often exceeded what many civilians in war-torn Europe, including their own families, were receiving. This stark contrast wasn't lost on the men, and the faint, often ignored hum of the camp radio, occasionally playing arias, was a subtle foreshadowing, a quiet cultural permeability, a strange symphony of war, duty, and unexpected common humanity. This strange symphony of war, duty, and unexpected common humanity played out daily within the meticulous, often scentless, confines of Captain Evelyn Reed's office at Camp McCoy. As the camp's logistics officer, her world revolved around a well-worn leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with neat columns of figures detailing every ration and supply requisition. The faint aroma of stale coffee often clung to the internal memos piled on her desk, each document a quiet testament to the colossal administrative task of provisioning nearly 2,000 Italian prisoners of war. Captain Reed faced a perpetual dilemma: how to uphold the War Department's strict protocols of wartime austerity while simultaneously ensuring adequate provisions for men officially designated as enemies, yet who were often just boys far from home. Her ledger, a silent witness, recorded the surprising directive: each prisoner was allocated a generous 3,000 calories daily. This wasn't merely sustenance. It was a deliberate policy, born from reports by military psychologists which, though often buried in internal memos, suggested a clear strategic advantage. Well-fed, productively employed prisoners, these reports argued, were significantly less prone to escape attempts or subversive activities. It was a stark, almost jarring contrast to the deprivation many of these men had known, and indeed, to what their own families were likely enduring in war-torn Europe. But how did this policy translate on the ground? And what did it mean for the local communities tasked with providing these resources? This question rippled beyond the barbed wire fences, reaching the fields surrounding the camp where civilian contractors like Mr. Arthur "Art" Jenkins operated. Art, a local Wisconsin farmer whose stained, calloused work gloves spoke of a life tethered to the land, supervised groups of Italian POWs. His motivation was a blend of patriotism and the simple, undeniable necessity of finding labor during a severe manpower shortage that had crippled American farms. Yet Art's personal dilemma was more profound. How to reconcile the wartime propaganda, which often demonized these men as ruthless enemies, with the reality of their quiet, efficient work ethic and surprisingly amiable demeanor. He'd seen them, day after day, tending crops under the wide Midwestern sky, their movements precise, their complaints few. The official directives from Washington, D.C., outlining precise protocols for prisoner treatment, from clothing allowances to recreational activities, often felt a world away from the dust and sweat of a Wisconsin cornfield. If you find yourself drawn into these quiet, often overlooked corners of history, where human stories defy simple wartime narratives, consider subscribing to Whispers from WW2. We delve deeper into the forgotten archives, bringing these untold tales to light. The logistical dance was intricate, a complex ballet of national policy meeting local necessity. Who precisely decided that Midwestern farm labor was the ideal solution for idle POW hands, transforming potential adversaries into essential workers? And how did the faint, often ignored, hum of the camp radio, occasionally playing Italian arias that few American guards understood, become a quiet, almost subversive cultural bridge? The quiet hum of the camp radio, occasionally playing Italian arias, wasn't just background noise. It was an unspoken bridge, a subtle crack in the official wall of separation. How did such cultural permeability even begin to manifest in a place designed for strict internment? The answer, like so much of this story, lay in the meticulous, often contradictory, directives emanating from Washington, D.C. By late 1943, the War Department's internal bulletins, often arriving at Camp McCoy as terse telegrams, meticulously outlined the treatment protocols for Italian prisoners. These weren't simply about containment. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a historian specializing in wartime logistics at the National Archives, notes that these directives were a complex blend of Geneva Convention obligations and pragmatic self-interest. The goal was to transform idle hands into essential labor, especially for America's farms facing severe manpower shortages. The scent of freshly turned soil on a Wisconsin morning, promising a bountiful harvest, suddenly became a strategic asset. So the question wasn't just if POWs would work, but how their labor could be optimized without violating international law or sparking resentment. It was a delicate balance, one that the War Department believed could be achieved by keeping these men content. Camp McCoy, by then, was home to over 2,000 Italian POWs. Reports from military psychologists, often buried in thick, stapled memos now held at the Library of Congress, offered a compelling, if cold, justification for humane treatment. They concluded that well-fed, productively employed prisoners, those who had purpose beyond their fences, were significantly less prone to escape attempts or subversive activities. This wasn't altruism, it was strategic. Their daily rations, a surprisingly generous 3,000 calories, often surpassed what many civilians in war-torn Europe, including their own families, were receiving. Imagine the quiet clink of forks on tin plates in the mess hall, the substantial weight of a full stomach, a stark contrast to the gnawing hunger many had known. This abundance, while seemingly benevolent, was a calculated move. But did this calculated generosity truly foster loyalty, or merely a quiet resignation? If you find these hidden layers of history, these untold stories beneath the surface of official narratives, as compelling as we do, consider subscribing to Whispers from WW2. We strive to bring these forgotten echoes to light, one immersive investigation at a time. The camp radio, with its occasional Italian arias, then takes on new meaning. It wasn't explicitly sanctioned, yet it persisted, a quiet testament to the human need for connection, for a piece of home. Guards, accustomed to country music or big band sounds, might not have understood the lyrics, but the mournful, passionate melodies carried a universal weight. It was in these subtle moments, the shared airwaves, the unexpected abundance of a simple meal, that the official protocols began to fray at the edges. What truly happens when enemies are given comfort, even a sliver of their own culture, within the confines of captivity? Within the confines of captivity. That question, perhaps, found its quiet answer not in grand pronouncements, but in the subtle shift of a shared meal, a daily ritual repeated across thousands of miles. For Private Vittorio Rossi and hundreds like him at Camp McCoy, the first encounters with American food were often met with a bewildered chuckle. He remembered the crisp, cold Wisconsin air biting at his cheeks, and then the sudden warmth of the mess hall, thick with unfamiliar aromas, cinnamon, baked apples, things far removed from the olive oil and garlic of his homeland. The initial laughter at the apple torte wasn't simply a cultural misunderstanding. It was a deeply ingrained distrust, a psychological defense mechanism, a quiet echo of fascist propaganda that had painted Americans as decadent and weak. Vittorio, like many, harbored the suspicion that this abundance was a trick, a temporary facade. What truly lay beneath the surface of this seemingly generous provision, beyond mere calories? Yet the torte kept coming, day after day, a consistent, predictable quality, a stark contrast to the deprivation and uncertainty they had known in war-torn Europe. Captain Evelyn Reed's meticulously kept leather-bound ledger, detailing every ration, recorded the surprisingly generous 3,000 calories allocated daily per prisoner. This wasn't merely sustenance. It was an unwitting Trojan horse of consistent, albeit institutional care. The sweet, tart taste, the buttery crust, became a small, undeniable reality in their confined lives. The initial suspicion began to chip away, slowly, like ice melting under a persistent sun, revealing a different kind of truth. Out in the fields surrounding the camp, under the watchful eye of Mr. Arthur Art Jenkins, the local Wisconsin farmer, the physical work was demanding. Art, his calloused hands often stained with earth, initially viewed the Italian POWs through the lens of wartime rhetoric, expecting animosity. Yet he observed their quiet efficiency, their surprising amiability, a stark contrast to the demonizing propaganda he'd heard on the radio. The men, well-fed and with a measure of dignity, worked diligently, their movements precise even in the biting wind that swept across the fields. The very act of productive labor, combined with consistent nourishment, began to subtly reshape their perception of their captors, fostering an unexpected level of cooperation. This silent negotiation, played out daily between official protocol and undeniable humanity, hinted at a deeper strategic insight. But how did this unforeseen cooperation, born from a simple dessert and hard work, truly impact the larger war effort? And what strategic revelation did it spark within the highest echelons of military planning, far beyond the fields of Camp McCoy? The strategic revelation was profound, echoing far beyond the quiet fields of Wisconsin. Military psychologists, in reports that eventually reached Washington, D.C., concluded that the humane treatment and productive employment of prisoners of war were not merely ethical considerations, but a potent strategic asset. This understanding, born from observation at camps like McCoy, led to a reevaluation of POW management globally. Thousands more Italian prisoners were subsequently transferred to the American Midwest by mid-1944, their labor becoming indispensable to the nation's agricultural output, directly impacting the war effort by securing vital food supplies. The initial laughter at the apple torte, once a symbol of cultural distance and distrust, had by then transformed into a quiet acceptance, even a small comfort. It was a testament to how consistent, if institutional, care could bridge immense divides. This unexpected cooperation between adversaries, fueled by shared labor and surprisingly good food, proved that even in conflict, humanity could forge an unforeseen strategic path forward. What other hidden moments of unexpected connection do you think shaped the course of history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're drawn to these untold stories where human nature recontextualizes the grand narratives of war, consider subscribing to Whispers from WW2 to continue our exploration.